How do we know what's true? All this talk these days about mis and disinformation, about fake news, deep fakes, shallow fakes, cheap fakes. The first level of thinking is really being in the industry and frankly amongst government of going, things are either true or false. So if something's there and I argue it to be false, I'll say it's false. But then if you don't believe it and you tell me it's false, do I believe you? The issue that we find with all of these is whether it's talking about whether the pandemic was a real situation or whether it was made up, whether we thought the school shootings were actually set up or whether tragically young children really did die in that bloody carnage. For most people, there's no debate. The issue really when we think about news and misinformation is that how does it impact how a brand relates to that news? If I argue that you tell me something is true and I say it's false, and you already believe it to be true and you don't align with my point of view, then by definition, why would you believe me? So it doesn't change the narrative and it doesn't change the understanding of the content. If we just take the last election, it was very clear that half the country thought one candidate should be elected in the US and the other half the country thought another candidate should be elected in the US. Anyone who didn't think their candidate got elected is then happy to say that the election was fraud or robbed. Those whose candidates was successful are happy to say that it was a full and fair process. You can't arbitrate true and false. Now I want to put that in an advertising context. If there was a piece of content that said the US election in 2024 is on the first Tuesday in November. And I asked a range of different audiences from evangelical Christians to moderates to liberals to different ethnic groups and racial profiles, etc. And I will ask them whether they agreed with that statement. They would all agree because that is a pretty immutable fact. If I said to that same range of audiences, is the election in November going to be fair? I would get very different answers. So if you had a 1 to 10 scale of agree, disagree, what's interesting to the first question, everybody would be a 9 or 10. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the election's on the first Tuesday in November. But if I ask the second question of whether it's fair or not, I'm going to get some people saying no, it's not, and some people saying yes, it is. What I've now got is on this 10-point scale, I've got a delta, I've got a range. So what I would surmise is that you have this idea of the gap between different groups' understanding of a piece of content is what I'd call a contention score. If everyone's aligned, there's a tiny contention score because everyone thinks the same thing, in which case there's no risk. And for an advertiser looking to avoid any brand risk by avoiding sensitive content, you've got no problem, you could put your ad there. If I had the other piece of news that basically had this area where I have a contention score this wide, because some people believe it to be true and some believe it not to be true, I'm not going to arbitrate whether it's true or false, but I am going to say these groups of people believe it, these groups don't believe it, and so between these different groups, there's contention. That contention for an advertiser who's very conservative may be something that would potentially cause fear and anxiety, and therefore they wouldn't want to associate their brand with that content because it could be contentious and give a negative feedback. Equally, if I was, say, a campaigning brand like Ben & Jerry's or Marc Jacobs, that contention may be okay because half of the people support my point of view and I want to align with my consumers in an authentic way. So, in the world of mis and disinformation, we've actually explored about 20-odd providers of ways to score and categorize content for mis and disinformation. And frankly, we've realized that all of them are flawed because they're building on this concept of truth. And actually, once you start to pivot it to believability, and you look at the different audiences' belief in a statement to be true, not true, and then you look at the range and gap, you're allowed to get contention scores. And contention scores are how we're recalibrating all the content so that we can help advise clients, and especially when we're looking at news and sensitive topics, whether it's either highly contentious, which a conservative brand would avoid, or whether it's going to be something that is polarizing, so there is a high contention score, but actually half of those people are aligned with the view of that brand. Take a Ben & Jerry's, in which case they would align with it. This launch of contention scores really allows us to make a stand in the industry, bring in more news content, more sensitive social content, which today in most cases has been excluded from monetization and advertising. Give it an appropriate level of scoring and match that with safety and suitability to actually allow more inventory to be monetized, advertisers to get more reach, to get better pricing and to reach more audiences, and to be able to match their choices based on their profile of their own risk profile and their requirement to be suitable or can be aligned with a key issue. So, contentiousness scores, smarter way of doing mis and disinformation, coming soon from Channel Factory.